All right, so you want to be an IAS officer, right?
Hmm.
Well, let's get you prepped for those UPSC exams.
Absolutely.
We're going deep today into a topic that's almost guaranteed to pop up.
Oh, yeah.
Fiscal consolidation in India. We're dissecting a really interesting Live Mint article.
Great source.
So get those highlighters out, folks. Now, we all know the nation's well-being really relies on its economic stability.
It's true.
And that's where fiscal consolidation steps onto the stage.
That's right. And what's so fascinating about this topic is that it's not just about numbers.
Right.
It's about making smart choices, the kind of choices that impact the economy's long-term health. Imagine you're the captain of a ship sailing through rough seas.
Oh, like that?
You need to balance those immediate needs with long-term sustainability. That's exactly what our government is doing with fiscal consolidation.
Love the analogy. But let's break this down, especially for our UPSC aspirants out there.
Sure.
Why is this topic such a must-know, both for mains and prelims?
Well, for starters, it's a cornerstone of macroeconomic stability.
A topic that comes up again and again in both those exams.
Hmm.
Think about it. A stable economy attracts investment, it creates jobs, and ultimately it makes people's lives better.
Makes sense.
And that's exactly what the UPSC wants. Individuals who get those complex economic dynamics
Right.
and can contribute to policymaking.
So it's not just about memorizing definitions and theories.
Not at all.
It's about understanding the impact of fiscal consolidation in the real world.
Exactly.
How has India been doing in this whole fiscal balancing act?
India, well, it's got a pretty interesting track record when it comes to this. We've seen some impressive progress. Like back in 2020-21, the fiscal deficit was a whopping 9.2% of GDP.
That's pretty high.
Right. But by 2023-24, it was down to 5.6%.
Wow, that's a big drop.
It is. And it shows that some strategic fiscal measures were taken by the government.
So what were some of these key strategies? Was it all about cutting the spending?
Not necessarily. It's more about spending smarter.
Okay.
And then also improving how we collect revenue.
You know those huge infrastructure projects we see all over the country?
Oh, yeah.
That's targeted spending aimed at boosting growth. And on the revenue side, the government's been working hard to broaden the tax base,
Oh, yeah.
making tax collection more efficient. It's a multifaceted approach.
So it's like a two-sided coin.
Yes.
Spending strategically on one side
Right.
and then collecting efficiently on the other.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing it's not always smooth sailing, right?
Oh, of course not. There are always challenges,
Right.
both internal and external. Globally, there are geopolitical tensions, volatile capital flows. All of that creates uncertainty, and it impacts trade. Then, domestically, some states are facing rising fiscal deficits, which adds pressure to the national budget.
Right.
And then there's the ever-present challenge of balancing fiscal discipline with the need for social spending and investments in growth.
Sounds like a real juggling act.
It is.
Lots of factors to consider. Speaking of navigating this complexity, India has a specific framework in place, right? The Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act.
Yeah.
The FRBM Act.
Yes.
What's that all about?
Well, the FRBM Act, enacted back in 2003, is basically India's rule book for fiscal responsibility. It's like a set of guidelines, targets aimed at keeping the government's finances under control.
So setting financial goals.
Yeah, think of it that way. One of the main objectives is to reduce the fiscal deficit and eliminate the revenue deficit. Basically, making sure that the government doesn't spend more than it earns from taxes.
Sounds like a good plan.
Oh.
But I've heard this act has been amended a few times.
It has.
Why is that?
That's a great question. And it really highlights why fiscal policy is so complex. You see, the economic landscape, it's constantly evolving.
Right.
What might have worked a few years ago may not be suitable now.
Right.
Those amendments to the FRBM Act reflect that need for flexibility.
It makes sense that the rules need updating to reflect these changes in the economy. Now, there was an expert committee formed to review and suggest improvements to the FRBM Act, right?
Yes, there was.
Could you tell us more about that?
You're talking about the NK Singh Committee.
Yeah.
A group of really brilliant economists who were tasked with, well, assessing the effectiveness of the FRBM Act and recommending ways to enhance it. One of their key recommendations was to shift the focus from rigid fiscal deficit targets to debt reduction as the primary goal.
Okay.
This approach recognizes that managing the overall debt burden is crucial for long-term sustainability.
So it's not just about limiting the deficit in a particular year.
No.
It's about managing the overall debt for the future.
Exactly.
That's a very nuanced perspective. Were there any other noteworthy recommendations from the committee?
There were. They also proposed creating an independent fiscal council to oversee fiscal policy and ensure responsible spending.
Mm,
Think of it as a watchdog, making sure the government sticks to the principles of fiscal prudence.
a fiscal watchdog. Interesting. Okay, so in this first part of our deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. We've defined fiscal consolidation.
Yes.
We've talked about why it matters,
Right.
India's journey so far.
And the framework in place to guide fiscal policy. But what does all this mean for India's future? Where do we go from here?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And
Yeah.
that's exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll delve into those challenges and opportunities that are ahead.
Okay.
And we'll look at some potential strategies for achieving sustainable fiscal consolidation in India.
Sounds intriguing.
It is. So welcome back to our deep dive into fiscal consolidation in India. Before we get all future focused, let's rewind a bit and look at how this has all actually played out in India's recent history.
Yeah, I like that. Real-world examples. Always the best way to really grasp these complex topics. So what kind of scenarios are we talking about here?
Let's take inflation, for example. Back in 2013-14, India's fiscal deficit was sitting at 4.5% of GDP. By 2018-19, it had come down to 3.4%. Now, this reduction in government borrowing, it wasn't just about playing with numbers. It actually helped to keep inflation under control.
Right. Which is essential. Absolutely. For a stable economy and, of course, a happier populace.
That's a perfect example of how this directly impacts people's lives.
It does.
You know, it's not just this abstract economic concept. It's about the prices we pay for stuff every single day.
Exactly. And it's not always about controlling spending either.
Right.
Let's look at capital expenditure, or CapEx, as it's often called.
Okay.
During the COVID-19 pandemic, India actually increased its CapEx, went from 1.6% of GDP in 2014-15 to 3.2% in 2023-24. And they did this while also providing financial relief to sectors that were hit hard.
That's interesting. Seems a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it, to increase spending during a crisis?
It might seem that way,
Yeah.
but the government recognized that investing in infrastructure, even during tough times, was absolutely vital for long-term growth.
I see. So it's like instead of patching up a leaky roof, you invest in reinforcing the entire foundation.
A great way to put it, this increased CapEx helped cushion the economic blow from the pandemic and laid the groundwork for future growth.
So it's like a calculated risk. Invest in the future, even when things are tough. We've talked about spending, but what about revenue? How's India been doing in terms of actually getting those resources?
That's another area where India's made some serious strides.
Okay.
The digitization of the tax system, that's been a real game changer.
How so?
It's brought greater efficiency in tax collection. Tax receipts have risen from 10% of GDP in 2014-15 to 11.8% in 2023-24.
So it's not about hiking taxes, it's about making the system work better.
Exactly. More user-friendly. And this increased revenue lets the government do more, invest more in public services, education, healthcare.
All crucial stuff.
It is. But of course, there are always factors that influence all of this, factors beyond our control.
Right. I was just thinking about that. Global events must have some kind of impact on India's fiscal policies.
Oh, absolutely.
What are some of those external factors?
Global trade dynamics are a big one. Things like trade wars, sanctions, protectionist policies. Those can all impact India's exports and imports, which puts pressure on the government's budget.
Right.
And then there's the volatility of capital flows.
Yeah.
When global interest rates are fluctuating, it can lead to money suddenly flowing in or out of India, which can impact the currency and the fiscal deficit.
It's like navigating this constantly changing landscape.
It is.
Makes you realize just how connected the world really is.
With all these complexities, are there any specific strategies or policies that India can use?
There are, absolutely. And this is where your understanding of this all gets really practical. For those UPSC exams, we'll be diving into some of these strategies in the final part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Think about things like targeted tax reforms, managing expenditures efficiently,
Right.
and a coordinated effort between the government and the Reserve Bank of India.
That's a great roadmap for the final part of our discussion. So, we've laid the groundwork, what fiscal consolidation is, India's journey so far, those factors that influence its effectiveness.
Right.
Now it's time for those solutions.
Yeah. And we're back for the final part of our fiscal consolidation deep dive. We've talked about the what, the why, even the how. But now, let's get practical. Solutions. The kind of strategic thinking UPSC examiners love to see.
Exactly. It's time to put on those policymaking hats and figure out how India can tackle those challenges and ensure sustainable fiscal consolidation. And remember, this isn't just about balancing those books, it's about creating an environment that supports growth, development, ultimately well-being for everyone.
Absolutely. It's about the long game, the big
Yeah.
picture. So where do we start? What can we actually do to make India's fiscal position stronger?
Well, one of the most effective things, and something you'll definitely come across in your UPSC studies, is tax reform.
Okay.
We need a system that's fair, efficient, broad-based.
Hmm.
That means we need to broaden the tax base itself, include more people, especially those in the informal sector, and we've got to improve tax compliance. It's not about burdening people who are already paying taxes. It's about making sure everyone contributes their fair share.
So like casting a wider net and making sure there aren't any leaks. What specific reforms could really make a difference?
Streamlining the goods and services tax, the GST.
VSE, yeah.
Simplifying that structure, reducing the burden of compliance for businesses, and leveraging technology to monitor and enforce things better. Those can all really boost revenue collection.
EST reforms, got it.
Hmm.
What else can we do to achieve sustainable fiscal consolidation?
Another key thing is managing expenditure efficiently.
Okay.
And this has to happen at both the national and state levels. It's about prioritizing, spending in areas that give us the highest return on investment, things like education, healthcare, infrastructure, developing skills. It's not about cutting back on essential services. It's about being smart, making every rupee count.
So it's kind of like being a savvy investor. Put your money where it generates the most value.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And speaking of smart investments, let's not forget about coordinating those monetary and fiscal policies. The Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, and the government, they need to be in sync, working together.
So it's like a dance, almost. Each partner knowing their steps, moving in harmony.
Exactly. The RBI's monetary policy, which impacts interest rates and the money supply, needs to complement the government's fiscal policy, which is all about spending and taxation. When those two work together, you get this beautiful symphony of economic stability and growth.
Love that analogy. So we've got tax reforms, efficient spending, and policy coordination. Anything else in that fiscal consolidation toolbox?
You know, one area that's often overlooked is fostering a culture of fiscal responsibility. Not just within the government itself, but across society. It means educating people about why fiscal discipline is so important, encouraging responsible borrowing, saving habits, promoting transparency and accountability in how the government spends money. It's about creating a mindset where everyone understands how fiscal decisions impact the nation's well-being.
That's a really powerful point. It's about empowering people to participate in shaping a responsible future.
Absolutely. Fiscal consolidation isn't just a task for policymakers, it's a shared responsibility. It requires everyone's participation. And this is a key takeaway for all those future IAS officers out there. Fiscal consolidation isn't about memorizing formulas. It's about understanding the complexities, analyzing the challenges, coming up with innovative solutions. It's about being adaptable, responsive, and always keeping that long-term well-being of the nation in mind.
That's a great message to wrap up this deep dive on. It's been quite a journey. We explored fiscal consolidation in India, analyzed those real-world examples, and brainstormed some solutions.
And don't forget, all this info comes from that excellent Live Mint article we talked about. If you're prepping for those UPSC exams, definitely check it out.
Absolutely. And to all our listeners, we hope this deep dive has been helpful for your UPSC preparation. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more insightful discussions. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep those UPSC dreams alive.